Welcome to the Dungeon Talk, a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition podcast providing tutorials, inspiration, info, and interviews about different aspects of Dungeons & Dragons. Today, I'm your host Nathaniel, and you're listening to The Dungeon Talk, Episode 10, Locating Locations. Dungeon Talk! Dungeon Talk! Dungeon Talk! Do-do-do-do! So today we are talking about locations. Locations are a huge part of Dungeons & Dragons in every campaign setting, as they are where you are. If you don't have a location, you're not anywhere. You're nowhere. But then again, nowhere is a place in Marvel, so I guess nowhere can be someplace. So you have to have locations, though. Locations are so important, as having locations in your world can help build a sense of familiarity and growth and backstory within the world. So I'm going to go over with you, everybody, a couple of steps on locations and creating your locations for your D&D world. The first thing you want to consider is how you're going to plan the city. And something so important is that you need its purpose. You need to know why it's there in two circumstances. Why is it in there in the story? Like, why have you included it in your campaign? And then why is it there in the world? A good example of this would be like, I need a place where the characters can just quickly rest up and have a quick night's sleep and then move on on the rest of their journey. That's a great example. It's really simple. You don't need to do much more than that. In other cases, it might be where they're going to have a confrontation with an evil cult and fight to death with the evil priest who leads this dastardly cult. And then the other reason is, why is it there in the world? Why is it built there? Why did somebody put that city there? I'm going to go with a theoretical city. Say we have a nice little town called Yellowseed. Yellowseed is it's a small village with only a few people, with a few 100 people, I think, something like that. It's a very small village. Pretty much everyone knows everybody. And so we want to know, why is it there? In this theoretical story, I need my players to gather some quick information from one of the townsfolk, perhaps a butcher who has a certain recipe, or a tailor who recently sold clothes to some villain or evildoer. So that's why it is there in the story, because they need to get some information to move on. But why is this city or village there? Why did I put it specifically in this spot on the map? I'm going to say it's a fishing village and it's near a river. And they put this village there because there's lots of good fish, and they're all very hardy. They're not sick, and they're all very healthy and big, so they can feed lots of people and they can make more money. Commerce is something you do want to think about when you're talking about, like, what's the reason for having something there and stuff. So then you want to think, okay, we have this city that's here for fishing. That's why it's there. Then you want to start planning other things about factions, about government, controlling powers, effects, conflicts, internal and external affairs. What's the military power? What are the factions on the inside? So often starting in a city, if you're starting off in a city with your players, it's good to start with a big city, because this makes it so the players can sort of last several levels, like at least 1 to 3 to 4 or 5, without having to outgrow the challenges in one given area, and they can sort of familiarize themselves with the area. So you then want to think, what's going on in this place? What are the ruling powers? Is it a very evil monarchy? Is it a very fascist dictator? Is it a very orange man with tacky blonde hair and tiny hands? Who is controlling this place? You want to think, who is controlling it? Because once you know who's controlling it, you can start to build up factions around your world. Maybe this faction who's of controllers are part of a circle of druids, and they're a very part of this big forest, and they are trying to preserve nature. But then they might have an opposing faction on another city that is something like you have another city that is a very industrial city, and they're trying to chop down trees of this forest. That creates conflict. Having different opposing ideals and motives is an easy way to come up with conflicts on the outside. Often when you have players that are just starting out, you don't want to involve them in the story way too much, because that way it creates a sort of sense that that they have to go check this thing out and they have to work on it. Unless that's the exact plot you're using for your story, then you don't want to do this, because your players will get distracted. And oftentimes players do get very distracted. So when you have these external and internal effects, so you want to think very simply. Like, you might want to give like subtle hints, like, hey, there's this war going on. You don't have to go check it out, but just so you know, there's a big war. People are fighting. They don't agree, because that's how the world works. They don't agree on something and they fight, because people are not smart all the time. So then you want to think, you want to think on what you are doing for the building of the city. What are you actually needing for the city when you're creating it? Like, what's there? What are the buildings? What's the housing? So to continue with my theoretical yellow seed settlement, I'm going to think of the factions first. So of course they're going to have like some sort of fishing guild, because, well, duh, they're a fishing place, so they have a fishing guild. And then they have a small leader, some sort of like, I don't know, town mayor, something small, who doesn't hold lots of authority. He's just there to make sure everybody pays their taxes and doesn't goof around. Now we're moving on to building the city. Since I need the players to just grab some information, I want to make a place where they can get that information. So let's say it's an alchemist who has a secret recipe for a potion. Then you want to include that alchemist's house, because it would be really silly if the alchemist didn't have a house that lived there. That would kind of defeat the point. So, start thinking, what places do I need? I want them to be able to rest, so I would want like a tavern or an inn or a hotel or something. If I want them to be able to go shopping, and something that I have learned is that players really like shopping. Like, for whatever reason, all my players are very into shopping. So like they'll often ask like, hey, is there a good blacksmith around? And I'll be like, yeah. So I always include a couple of shops, like weapons shops, an adventuring item shop, book shop, magic items shop, even if you're playing high fantasy. It really depends on your world. So just think, what do the players want? And something when you're building your settlements that can be very helpful is to go ahead and like ask your players, hey, what do you want to see in this game world? Do you want lots of adventure, or lots of shopping, or lots of investigating? All sorts of things. This can make it easier for you to build your world without having to do too much extra work. Then you want to think on the purpose and the story in the world. So if I've already talked about this, so Yellow Seed is a fishing village. It's there because they can make lots of money fishing. So it's there for the fishing. So you want to include buildings and places that talk about fishing. So like some fishing docks, or a tackle and bait shop, stuff like that. Stuff that would make lots of sense. Another quick tidbit is you want to be flexible. You want to make sure that your players have the option to kind of mess around, even if that's not where they're supposed to go, because players very often love to mess things around. So as we continue, I've got a couple more things to say about building your locations. You want to think of the general amount of buildings, because having buildings is the stuff that you're going to be doing around the place, unless it's, I don't know, forest then again, that would be weird because that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about more of like cities, villages, and settlements. So think, how big is this place? Is this like a grandiose city? It's going to have hundreds of buildings that I might have to, that if I have the time, I'm going to actually go ahead and try and flesh every single one of them out. If you do have the time, you can totally do that, but I wouldn't because that's just way too much work you don't have to do. So it's totally up to you on how much you want to do. For our theoretical village of Yellowseed, we're going to want to do something like, since I said like a couple hundred people, you might want to have like a couple hundred houses, and then probably like 50 or so more for like dedicated to community stuff, stores, shops, I don't know, customs office, buildings, those kinds of things. And not all of them have to be for like for commerce. Maybe they can be like a barn or a silo or different things like that. Just think of what this city needs and what would make sense for it. So, since this is a fishing village, we're going to include a fishing guild hall. You then want to move on to, again, you want to think of the lore based around the buildings. Like, maybe there was a place that was founded hundreds of years ago by an old king. Stuff like this gives your world a little bit more oomph. Gives it a little bit more stuff like, I'm not entirely sure, but like, what was I about to say? Something like it gives a sense of depth and intrigue about your world, and it makes it seem like it's actually a more of a living place than just a random thing that you just made up out of nowhere. So another tip I'm gonna have is you want to really consider the population and the NPCs, and this is something pretty simple. So dungeon masters out there, some places don't. You just want to. I have a link in this episode. So you go to dnd.com, D&D Beyond, and you will find a list of races. The link is in the episode's description, and it talks like, and it just has a list of every single race. And what you want to do is whatever location you're working on, you just want to like say, all right, I'm going to include humans, elves, Aarakocra, Tabaxi, dwarves, halflings, gnomes, but not these guys, or no Genasi, or fish people, or Triton. For whatever reason, maybe they don't like that. And I know, like, in my world, like, I have some places that just really hate Goliaths and elves for whatever reason. Or, like, maybe I have a place that just hates that hates everybody but the Kenku. I don't know. It's totally up to you. The world is all up to you. You can create whatever you want. I would say the world is your oyster, but I don't understand that term, and I think it's a really weird idea to say. So this episode is probably going to be a bit shorter because I do not have as much content, as it's a pretty simple episode. But the last tip I have for you is to use the Dungeon Master's Guide's tools, or whatever game system you're using. If you are listening and you're not a fan of D&D, whatever game system you're using, you want to be considerate of the tools and content that is already there. I know the Dungeon Master's Guide has several very helpful tools on the sizes of settlements, how to map them out, and what kind of commerce, defenses, government, and the population there. Unfortunately, I do not have as much content as I usually do, so this is going to be the last part of the episode, so goodbye. Once again, thanks for listening to this episode of the Dungeon Talk. We upload weekly on Fridays and upload weekly on Saturdays if you want to check out our brand new YouTube channel. You can also find the latest news and updates on our Instagram at The Dungeon Talk. You can go ahead and ask questions on our email, thedungeontalk@gmail.com, and you can listen basically anywhere you can get your podcast. So once again, thanks for listening. Stay nerdy, stay safe. Dungeon Talk! Dungeon Talk! Dungeon Talk! Do 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 do!